brief moments of brilliance. I rarely like to associate anything that I'm saying with the word brilliance. If you find anything I say as brilliant, I can assure you that the majority of it came from people in this room who work towards developing me. So, talk about it this way. Oh, it's got my full last name. I rarely use that one. So, my commitment to everybody, anytime I give a talk, do any type of training, is that I guarantee you when you walk out of this room, you will have learned at least one thing. So, kangaroos can't bounce backwards. Who already knew that? Kangaroos cannot bounce backwards. Did anybody already know that? All right, perfect. If you don't learn anything else, leave the room and don't tell anybody that you learned anything. Perfect. All right, so my session here, can you fit it in the subject line? Being the high D that I am, I try to move very quickly in my communication process. So my goal here is to give you all some tips to really be effective in your email communication. So I always like to kick off saying, does this really sound familiar when you send off that email or, I have a question for you. Please call me to discuss. Probably even more common these days with people working from home so much more. And you usually get a response. No. So here's how I'm going to sum it up. The 4 W's of email. And always when you're about to communicate, start with, is email the best way to communicate this? I often have to work with team members that, I ask them, hey, have you built a relationship? Have you followed up on that particular topic? Particularly some of my folks that do auditing processes where it's a tough conversation and sometimes they just have to say, the baby's ugly. Sending that an email probably isn't always the best way to do it. So once you've asked that question and you say, hey, email is the best way, I say the 4 W's. Say, why am I communicating? What needs to be communicated? When does this need to be communicated? And who needs to know this? So the why, you're using the subject line. It's like the most simplest way to do it. Always include a subject in your email. Who's got that person in your company that never has a subject line filled out? Awesome. Yeah, I can name them, but they're not here, and Paula would throw me under the bus. So this truly is the summary of what the email is about. Limit the subject to that viewable subject line. Be specific and concise. If you need a response, you can state it right here. And most importantly, you have to recognize that that subject line may determine whether or not your email is even read. If it ain't there, it's easy to hit delete. So talk about a few tips on the subject line. So I use this example here as probably a great one. It says coupon issue. In restaurants and probably any form of hospitality, it's like you see that and you think, hey, is this a marketing issue? Is this an IT programming issue? Is this an app issue? Is this a guest complaint? And as you can see in this particular example, which one did I read? The very last one. Do you guys think I scrolled all the way to the bottom and read from bottom to top? No, I didn't. I just tried to get to the summary at the very beginning there. But such a great example. I assure you probably the distribution list was pretty gigantic, which we'll talk about that in just a second. But ultimately, the reality that we face, everybody's busy. They're sifting through those emails, and the likelihood that they're going to jump into it in a timely manner, that's going to be dictated by that subject line. One of the other items I mentioned is if you need a response or need an action to be taken, that subject line, if you include it there, is almost the strongest guarantee of all the things I ever tell you. Using the subject line is going to be a manner that's going to help get you the response or the action that you need. You've got these specific examples. My counterparts, my colleagues at Del Taco, it's the VP of Company Ops, Franchise Ops, the president of the company, a few other folks that are pretty much inundated just like everybody else in the organization. And when I'm trying to get them to move quickly, I let them know, hey, this is an FYI only. I don't want you to get inundated in some meeting or blindsided finding out that you didn't even know about this topic. Hey, I need somebody to review and approve this. Hey, I'm telling my field organizations, open and responded by this date. So that's ultimately what you're hitting out there on the what is this about, the topic there. So then the what am I communicating, that body of the text, quite frankly, is probably the most critical pieces, and that is use bullet points whenever possible. Again, when you think about communication, particularly in email, if there's a lot of back and forth, probably needs a little in-person dialogue versus this laundry list of information. And again, being the high D that I am, I love me some bullet points. And I think if we all know, particularly when you're talking to your hotel managers, your restaurant managers, it's pretty common that we're the high Ds in the organization usually, and those getting straight to those topics. I know this sounds a little funny, but keeping your email to one screen whenever possible, and I know that varies, and I'm not talking about the gamers out there that have like 14 screens that are probably about as big as this one right here. That's a little different. You could probably fit the entire book there. Anytime that you're going to have some type of an attachment, always try to give it a little bit of a reason for them to open it on there. And if you need a response, making sure you let them know in that communication when you need that response. We're very, in the restaurant group, my team does a majority of those communications, and it goes out to those restaurants, those managers, and we get that naughty list 2 weeks later saying, we haven't gotten a response from these 800 people. Well, did you even tell them when you needed it by? Because they're going to get to it when they get to it. If it's a book, probably needs an attachment. Or if it's a book, it might even, again, need to be a meeting anyway, or a phone call, or a webinar. And that's where it hits that piece, is that back and forth. It's so easy to lean on those pieces of communication, just saying, I'm going to type it off and send it off, and if they read it, they read it. And if they don't read it, I'm going to throw them under the bus later saying they didn't do whatever it was I told them to do. And that other reminder for us in these days, fonts matter. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And my font is whatever the default is. I think it's Calibri or Arial, one of those two. All right, so we've talked about those pieces. Now, when does it need to be communicated by? Frankly, I will say this probably is one of the most important things we need to think about. I already mentioned putting it in the communication, letting them know and informing them, but you got to make sure you gave them the time to actually get it done. And again, you think about it, particularly in restaurant groups, hospitality, we are so busy. You think about it, how common is it even in your organization that accounting department shoots off that email on Friday at 5 p.m. because they had to get their task done, and then Monday at 9 o'clock, well, they haven't responded yet. You got to put that in your perspective when you're thinking about that communication piece. And then lastly, on the timing front, consider the time of day you're sending it. Again, we're not an accounting firm. I guess I'm picking on a lot of accounting people. Are there any people who went to school to be accountants? Very oddly, that was actually my first career path. Anybody who knows me very well is thinking, what the heck was he thinking about? We'll probably broadcast this later. I don't want to get cut off by whoever. Then, also just consider that many are field managers. They take time off during the week. This is hospitality after all, right? That, again, another one of those corporate office faux pas is that I sent the email off on Wednesday. It was urgent. Why didn't I hear back on Wednesday? Because they were probably out fishing with their kids, something like that. And probably quite frankly, the most challenging, the most frustrating one is to ask yourself truly at the end of the day, who needs to know this? Who are the right people? Who are the right recipients? So I always remind people, listen, the two, that's whoever truly needs to communicate, or they're also the person that you need to take action from. Your CC, it's just FYI people. Don't expect a response from these people. And in some cases, they might not even read it. And that's okay, because again, it was in most cases just an FYI. And then that BCC. Does anybody know what CC stands for, by the way? And it's not pizza. Carbon copy. For any of the youngsters in the room, ask somebody. They'll explain to you what that means. And then that BCC, which stands for blind carbon copy. Very nice. Only use it when it's announced. And I'll give you a sample of what that means, because who's ever been the guy that got BCC'd? It was a controversial topic, and then you hit reply, well, here's what let me tell you about this. And all of a sudden, that person that BCC'd you is like, oh man, I was just trying to talk crap, and I didn't want them to know that I included them. I know we often say, man, I just survived that meeting, probably could have just been an email, and that's where I said everyone who probably should have just been CC'd in that communication. Because frankly, I know we throw those meetings, those webinars, those Zoom meetings under the bus, right? It's oftentimes, it was probably an impactful meeting, but it probably only needed to be like the 3 people in the room and not the 15. I can't recall. It might have been Steve Jobs, or it's the Amazon dude. What's his name? Bald dude. Bezos, not you, Patrick. I think he says, if you have more people in the room than you can feed with 2 pizzas, then you probably have too many people in that room. This is another one, those email groups. Oh, good God. This one came through just a couple weeks ago, my organization. This particular person, I'm sorry, again, it's probably an accountant, I'm not really sure, but they send out this communication, 78 recipients across all these email groups, and if you count them, only 9 people actually needed to respond to that email communication. I followed up with that particular individual. I started by saying, hey, listen, if you keep crowding those folks' inboxes, it may not be those 9 that need the response, but the next group of 9 may not read it because I didn't need to do anything on the last one. You know what response I got? Well, it was a lot easier just to use the email groups. It would have taken me too much time to figure out who those 9 people were. Then another person responded to me in that particular situation, said, well, sometimes peer pressure will also get them to take action to respond. And I said, if that's how we function in this organization, we have a horrible recruiting and hiring process problem. Now that BCC, I like to say, one of the tools to combat that evil reply all. It's funny how the amount of memes that are out there, if you Google reply all, I think Google may have been broken by the time I clicked that button. So I mentioned only use BCC when it's announced in some way, shape, or fashion. And so we know in our organization, oftentimes we use the BCC because we know that we want, if they hit reply, it only goes back to our communications group or whoever is sending it. And that's why we always include in the body of the communication actually who the recipients are. So they actually know, like, they didn't see themselves up on there. And also, that's the other great tool because in this particular case, that ops leadership knows, okay, it went to all of our company above store leaders. That's originally when I started using this action, we didn't include it. And so the above store leaders like, I don't even know if my people got this, who got it. And then what happened, it started hitting forward. And that one that we were trying to reduce the reply all of a sudden it turned into a bajillion other people that got emails. And then frankly, this is one I learned from my mentor many years ago, and it's the BCC to remove the wrong people, so to speak. This particular example I used, that we had some incident in a restaurant, and whoever sent it off, I think it was not an accountant, it was the marketing department actually, because there was a guest issue. And they included the HR department because they assumed it was a company store. Reality was it was a franchise store. Some action needed to be taken, and so it was a great tool that I use. I said, all right, I'm going to go ahead and remove Jeannie via BCC. She's our VP of HR. So I let him know in the body the reason why Jeannie is no longer on it, but I use that way. All right, she knows some action got taken. She knows why she doesn't need to participate anymore, but now the rally of back and forth, she doesn't have to get brought along for that ride. So, the quick recap here, folks, is really use those 4 W's of email. Again, first question, is email the proper use of communication? And then you go from there. Make sure you're using the tool for the why, what, when, and who. And I leave you with this thought. Don't email with emotion. And I will be the first one to admit that I am guilty of it sometimes. You get that frustrating email. I know I get quite a few, and I should probably every now and then take an insurance policy out on my keyboard because it's let me tell them what I have to say about that. Type it up, step away, take a break, and come back. Frankly, I'll tell you, I was guilty of sending one about a week ago. And you know what? I sent it off on a Friday, then I had a meeting on that Monday, and guess who felt like a jerk? It was me. Because in retrospect, I was like, I probably should have been that rude and pushy. So with that, thank you all so very much. I hope this is impactful. I hope you learned something beyond kangaroos.